Why is Ishmael 13 years old in Genesis chapter 17 and then a child just 4 chapters later? I'm answering your question. Hi, I'm Jeremy. I'm a deep skeptic, also a pastor. This seeming contradiction reveals one of the most fundamental concepts in understanding the book of Genesis. So in Genesis chapter 17, God is establishing a covenant with Abraham, and he requires the circumcision of all of the males. And Ishmael is specifically referenced as being 13 years old. Then in Genesis chapter 21, you have the story of Ishmael and his mom being cast out, and it says that his mom actually hides him under a bush. And in case you want to say that it was just a really big bush that a 17-year-old could hide under, the language there is boy and child, and scholars say this really matches the description linguistically of a toddler. What you're seeing here is 2 different traditions, a priestly tradition and a non-priestly tradition. And what happens before Genesis is compiled by editors, these traditions are developing independently. And then when Genesis is put together, the people who are editing it are assembling this story from these different traditions. These traditions don't share the same chronology. And what we see here is a classic example of what scholars call a narrative theme. The ancient editors of the book of Genesis sometimes will combine these traditions into a single narrative, drawing like one piece from one narrative and another piece from another, and biblical scholars have a lot of fun and spill a lot of ink on deciding exactly which verses and passages belong to which tradition when they are combined like that. And then sometimes what they do is they take whole stories, whole narrative chunks from one tradition, and then another whole narrative chunk from another tradition, and they just put them next to each other. And that's what's happening here. And there's important reasons that they keep it just like it is. Number one is they don't have the same sort of historical values that we do in the modern world, where everybody is always looking for coherence and getting the details right. They're always looking for telling the truth of what happens and not necessarily being overly concerned with getting the details exactly right or creating a perfect narrative, seamless chronology. But why didn't they just change the age in this story so that it didn't stick out like a sore thumb? Well, that's because in this Genesis chapter 21 story, the fact that Ishmael is a child is really important to the story itself and the theological message that it is sending. The story in Genesis chapter 21 is about a divine rescue in the wilderness. And if Ishmael is 13, it drastically changes the sort of theological and emotional weight of the story. If he is a tiny, completely vulnerable baby, then it actually serves as an example, as a prototype for God rescuing the helpless. And this is a major theme in the Old Testament. Okay, and in the New Testament, but we're talking about Genesis. And this big theological idea is that when there is injustice happening against the vulnerable and the helpless, God is always on their side. Because in this story, the people who cast Ishmael and his mother out are God's family. It is the people, the chosen family of God, Abraham and Sarah. And you might expect, because they are God's family, that God is going to enforce whatever it is that they are doing. But that's not the case. In this story, God contradicts the chosen people, the chosen family, and rescues Ishmael and his mother. And the big application of this is that God's people should be about the same thing. Siding with the victims of injustice, helping the helpless and the poor and the vulnerable. So there you have it. Ishmael, 13, and then a child.